Welcome to Energy Today podcast. It's March of 2022, and there is a lot going on in the world of energy right now. Not all of it good, and a lot of it pretty confusing. So we're going to discuss one of the things that's going on. But if you look at where we're at with energy right now, we've got the green transition taking place. Maybe not working out so good for Germany, who went kind of all in, and now their biggest energy supply is coming from coal, and the amount of money being spent, things like that. There is a lot going on with the green transition. You've got inflation right now. You've got the Ukraine war, of course, is probably the major thing, and then something that's not getting a lot of attention right now is really problems with the shale revolution that aren't getting a lot of press. There's not a lot of discussions on it. Some really issues with technical things going on supply chain that are going to become major obstacles soon. But today what we're here to talk about is what's going on in Russia. And it's been announced that most of the major oil companies now are in some form going to exit Russia. BP has probably the biggest stake in Russia, and they have announced that they're going to flat exit Russia. I don't know exactly why, but we'll talk about the process and how it happened. Then you've got Exxon, Equinor, the major Norwegian oil company. Shell apparently is now exiting in some form, and a couple other companies, and then Total, the French giant, is suspending, which is not supplying funds to do additional development or operations. A little bit of a different approach. I'm not sure where all the others are going to go, but it looks like BP is all in to just pull out, sell everything, and be gone from Russia. And that's kind of a little bit of a scary thing if you're a BP stockholder, because according to some of the articles I've read, it represents close to half of their reserves. And for those that are in the industry, you would know that it's not that easy to replace reserves in today's environment. International markets are difficult to get into at best. And then if you jump into the shale plays, we'll talk about those on another podcast, but that is a whole another can of worms that have just a ton of challenges that weren't apparent 5 years ago and now certainly are. So let's talk about what's going on with BP. Okay, so how did BP get to this point? So on February 8th, according to Business Week, Bernard Looney, in a television interview, offered a simple rationale for continuing operations in Russia. What he said was, "Our job is to focus on the business of business and to avoid politics." That's normally a pretty good position for businesses. Today's environment maybe is a little more hostile. Not sure whether that's to the benefit of society in general, but that's what it is. A short time later, a few days later actually, in the day after the invasion, BP's board gathered, some in person, some virtually, at its London headquarters at 5 p.m. Executives, including Looney, decided in an emergency meeting with UK Business Secretary Kawasi Quatreng, who made it clear that the government wanted them to end the Rosneft relationship. So now we've got the government of the UK basically ordering BP to end a significant business relationship. So that was pretty significant, and BP and so BP is now stating that their interest in Rosneft is probably worth $25 billion, which is about a quarter of their market cap, I think, something like that. But then there's this cascading effect now that's taken place. So BP's abrupt decision started a wave of energy companies leaving Russia in oil and gas world. Shell, Norway's Equinor, were next, followed by Exxon Mobil Corp, and a day later, France's Total was more equivocal, saying it wouldn't provide capital for new developments. It ultimately stuck to its investments. So a little bit of a different position for Total, but the other guys are all basically in the same camp. So basically, the net effect of everything is that, as I understand it currently, pretty much all the major oil companies, with the exception of Total, are now exiting Russia. Personally, I'm kind of troubled by that. I think it's going to be a decision that will have ramifications, not to the end of the war, but for probably the next 20 or 30 years. And part of the reason for that is that this is kind of a new venture into what the global order may end up looking like, but in particular in energy. And we had stated, almost 8 months ago, before oil prices were going up, there was always the impression that there was a lot of excess supply available. When Iran bombed one of the Saudi facilities 2 years ago, something like that, it barely had a blip on oil prices. That was at a time when supplies were totally full everywhere. Storage was full everywhere. And I think the U.S. was producing a couple million barrels a day more than they currently are today. So there are a number of things now that have changed, but we stated last fall that we thought energy was approximately in balance, but no spare capacity. And one of the reasons is that if you look at the rig count in some of the countries that historically have been high producers with a low rig count, those rig counts are much higher now, which indicates there's a lot of drilling going on to maintain capacity. If you go to the Permian, for example, and you'll hear this number from us a number of times, if you drilled, I think it was in 2019, maybe 2018, they drilled 17,000 wells. Tons of activity, things were kind of rocking and rolling. 15,000 of those were required just to maintain level capacity. So a lot going on in energy. It's getting more difficult to find reserves. You have some pretty dramatic good things like Guyana and Exxon. But around the rest of the world, it's not that easy. So the West is now pretty much gone from all of the Russian Arctic, all the current fields. Now they've stopped buying oil. But the main thing is should we have the Western companies involved in Russia, participating, and is this a good decision for them to all be gone? I really struggle with that. I don't think it's a good decision. And just to give you a foray into what we're doing, we're not sanctioning Iran. We're not sanctioning or destroying the economy of Afghanistan. We've already done that. We're not wrecking a country like Iraq. We've done that. We're not destroying Libya. We've already done that. Or Syria or any of the other countries. Let's just take a look at what we're actually dealing with here from a geopolitical standpoint with regard to energy. So Russia has 146 million people. It's not Syria. It's not Libya. It's not Iraq. So here we are with regard to energy, deciding not to participate in, I guess what would be 80 billion barrels of oil reserves, ranked number 8th in the world. 188 TCF of gas, trillion cubic feet of gas, ranked first in the world. That's Russia. And we're now going to be gone from that in all aspects of Western oil companies. Military ranked top 5, we'll just say, out of 146 countries in the world. The world's leading wheat producer. Destroy the economy of Russia, and the world's leading wheat exporter is gone. What's that going to do for a food supply standpoint? Rare earth metals, huge supplier and potential supplier of the future, minerals, coal. So when I look at the energy companies pulling out of Russia rather than maybe suspending operations, that's a big concern to me. And there are a number of companies beyond energy that have taken a different step. There's a list of companies severing ties or suspending business activities, the likes of Apple, Harley-Davidson, MasterCard. I think McDonald's might be in there. And the question of whether you totally exit or whether you suspend the way Total has done it, I think is a legitimate discussion point. I'm gravely concerned about the pressure that's been put on apparently BP by the UK government. I am also very concerned about the dream team of Joe Biden and his group and the way they're handling this. It's almost as if that the anger of Joe Biden, he's going to prove he's a tough guy, and that is not very good. So I think I'm going to kind of close this podcast by talking about the comparatives of what we've been through in past wars. So if you look at post-World War I, the decision was made, primarily driven by the French, according to what I've read, to be extremely harsh to Germany, okay? Sanctions and limitations on everything that you do going forward. And if you look at what happened following World War I, the economy was crushed, the employment was crushed, the businesses were destroyed, and that essentially is credited with leading to the causes of World War II. If you look at post-World War II, if you want to study kind of an interesting approach, the Bretton-Woods Agreement is something I didn't know much about until a few years ago. I read a book called The Accidental Superpower by Peter Zion, and he talks about the approach that the U.S. made, bringing the Allies in, and essentially after the war was done, also bringing the defeated, bringing Japan, bringing Germany in, and allowing those countries to be built and to be built up. My concern is that the Biden administration, Boris Johnson, Macron, the EU, have no desire to create something in the line of the Bretton-Woods Agreement to bring Russia back into the world order or to the world community as soon as this is over, as soon as possible. Maybe patch up some things, and I won't get into the reason that this war is going on. I think there's a lot of views on it. I have mine, but that's not the subject for this point. But my concern are that we're not going to do Bretton Woods. We're going to crush the Russian economy. We're going to withdraw from energy, which you're talking the number one gas reserves in the world, and I think the number 8th oil reserves in the world. And we're walking away from that. So I know that not all this is consummated, and if I had advice for BP, Exxon, Equinor, Shell, I would say suspending operations, suspending funding would be a much better path. Exiting, I think, is a major mistake for the world, for the West, and for future of energy. I have an idea where those reserves will end up, and I don't think the balance of power for the world or the compassion for humanity and for building society and serving the needs of humanity are going to be well served by these companies pulling out. That's my view, and I'd like to thank you guys for listening to Energy Today podcast.